the meeting to order. First item on the agenda is a short update from me on where we're at with the outfall. John and I regularly attend a meeting hosted by Amy, along with GHD, who's doing the work on that. We met last week. We did receive from the Army Corps of Engineers a copy of their report that has been peer-reviewed, and they're working towards publishing it. USGS, I'm sorry, USGS. USGS, thank you. The town returned comments on the report. Primarily, the comments had to do with the presentation, the organization of the report, not on the substantive conclusions. The biggest takeaway is that where you have a wastewater treatment plant now that's been discharged into the ground, it's artificially changed the shape of the Sagamore lens. When we move it, the shape of the lens in that area will revert back to the shape that it had before the treatment plant was built. And the other one is there'll be a slightly lower flow coming out the Coonamessett River on a static time basis, but no reason in any of their reports to think that the outfall will have a negative impact on the Sagamore lens. And they're looking, I think we have a target of July maybe, Amy, for the report to be finalized and then released to the public. So that's good. The second item that there's a lot of conversation on has to do with what is the closure zone for shellfish around the outfall. For a long time, it was pretty much 1,000 to 1 was the criteria to define a zone right around the outfall. We have so much flow, that zone is pretty small. However, over the last period of time, because of the federal FDA regulation, the state is now going through a process looking at existing outfalls, saying if the treatment plant just stopped working and we were basically discharging raw sewage, how big an area would we have to put a closure in, and we need to have a plan in place for that. We used a modeler, Jim Churchill out of Huey, for all of our work so far. The state uses somebody named Dr. Chen, who's out of UMass Dartmouth. So we are currently having our modeler converse with Dr. Chen to make sure that he gets around to looking at our outfall, or that Churchill can modify what he's doing. So interestingly, it turns out that typically people have been working on, for the basic dispersion zone, 1,000 to 1. The state sometimes allows it to go to as low as 340 to 1. 320, thank you. And conversely, when they're looking at the airplane crashing into the wastewater treatment plant and no treatment being done and the wastewater going out, the federal government's regulation starts around 100,000 to 1, and the state allows you go down to like 32,000 to 1. So we're, again, back and forth trying to make sure of the right thing to model and get some maps together. Geotech labs are being finalized, no surprises. And I think GHD is now starting to give some consideration as to how deep the pipe would have to be going out. And the last thing that we're sort of working our way through is something called the Interbasin Transfer Act. The person who administers the state's program for the Interbasin Transfer Act has essentially indicated to us that because we get some of our water from the Upper Cape, that we have to go through what's called a waiver process on the Interbasin Transfer Act in order to have an outfall. And we've retained a consultant who is familiar with that process and working in it. So we see over the next couple of months that Interbasin Transfer Act thing to be taken care of. Is there anything else that we're working on, Amy? I think you hit the 4 high points that we covered. Right? Okay, good. All right, second item on the agenda. Everybody had homework to do.
Can I comment on the first item?
Go right ahead. Yeah.
Steve and Amy presented to the Sierra Club Zoom meeting last night that was convened, and Corin was there too. The big disappointment was there were only 24 participants, counting the presenters. I couldn't believe only 24 people showed any interest in this outfall. The good news is both Steve and Amy did a fantastic job of presenting things, and I think everybody should know that.
Yeah. Michael, you have to go, yep, got to stand up there, identify who you are.
My name is Michael McGrath. I think you all know me. I built the first denitrified septic system in Massachusetts, and boy, was I punished. What's come to my attention is I have relatives out in central Massachusetts, and they're plagued with pollution from PFOs and PFAs. And so what I have expressed, at least to Mr. Rafferty, is that I hope that your wastewater treatment system reduces PFAs and PFOs, because when I look at the density in Petersham, where the PFA and PFO, there's not very many people there, and yet there's you can't eat fish from one of the local ponds, and my cousin had to drive 3 wells before he could drink the water. So I don't know if you've ever tested for PFOs and PFAs, but you ought to test and make sure that there's hardly any coming out of your plant. So that's what my...
Thank you, Mike. Anybody else want to comment on the outfall?
Good evening. Matthew Hanley from Thomas Landis Road. Mr. Rafferty, I just wanted some point of clarification on, you mentioned the Coonamessett River. I don't see how the Coonamessett River would be relevant to the discharge from the wastewater discharge plan in West Falmouth. Did you mean the Massapequa Creek?
Nope, I meant the Coonamessett River.
So how would the discharge from our wastewater treatment facility change the lens, which would change the dynamics of the Coonamessett River, which is 10 miles away?
I could try to explain it to you, but I will probably not do it well. When the report is out officially in July, we'll make sure that you can access a copy of it and read. It's a whole big modeling thing they do for the entire lens.
All right, thank you.
But I guess in answer to be more specific, when I said that the biggest thing is that the mound that's been created by the wastewater plant now, over time, that mound will disappear. And the contours will be back to what they were historically. And that includes the creek that you're concerned about and the flow to it. Okay. Continuing on, item 2. The Pond Advisory Committee has been proposing some fertilizer regulations and brought it before this board at the last meeting on short notice, and I asked everybody to take a look at that and to maybe engage in discussion. Kim, would you like to present the?
Yeah, given that George isn't here, I will.
Thank you.
It's Kim Comart, Freshwater Pond Advisory Committee. So we have been considering a range of actions to try to address the fertilizer problem in Falmouth. And one that we have been discussing and that you have information about is a system that is actually being used in, part of what we're talking about is being used in Nantucket, requiring any company that applies fertilizer on the island to become certified and licensed to do so. So we're suggesting that Falmouth require any company that is going to be applying fertilizer to be certified and licensed in Falmouth. And they would be assigned a license number. They'd pay a licensing fee. The Nantucket charges $100 for a 3-year license, so we could do something similar. And then when a company is going to be applying fertilizer, and they are registered and they're licensed, they would be entering into a database and they'd apply for a permit. They would be entering into a database their license number, the location of the proposed application, and if they are not licensed, then they would be informed that they're not able to apply fertilizer in town. If their system, and as they enter the address that they want to fertilize, the database would have built into it all of the properties in Falmouth that are in a nitrogen-sensitive area or within 100 feet of a surface water body. We'd also would hope that the IT folks who design this enter in all of the addresses of all of the homeowners in Falmouth who receive the annual letter from Falmouth informing them of the fertilizer regulation. So that's built into the system. So that when the company enters into the database, certain properties are flagged as not, that it would be improper, illegal to fertilize there, and they would be notified of that. And they could even do that before they make the trip, over the bridge or whatever. They can do this on their iPad, on their computer, on their phone. So that's, and then this information would be stored in the town database, and they would be entering the location of the property, the amount of fertilizer they applied, and the phosphorus and nitrogen content of that fertilizer. The other piece of this is that any business in Falmouth that is selling fertilizer, hardware store, nursery, whatever, would be recording in the town database the fertilizer that they sold. And that data would be stored in a database. Citizens would have the opportunity to go into the database to see if a company is licensed. They could access the portal, they could see where fertilizer is being applied, and they could report violations, et cetera. So it's essentially, we have not dealt with the penalties or the citations. We haven't really looked at that yet. As you may know, a violation of the fertilizer bylaw now, you incur a $50 penalty, and there is literally no enforcement. The Freshwater Pond Advisory Committee had folks from the Marine Environmental Sciences Department come and meet with us. I think, Tom, you may have heard that discussion. And they acknowledged that they don't issue citations. We asked them how many they've issued in the last year, 5 years. It sounded like it was probably less than 10 in the last couple of years, and those were on coastal properties, on coastal properties. So this is, we know fertilizer is a significant contributor to the problems we've got with our waters. Some towns, like Orleans and Nantucket, are trying to actually prohibit the application of fertilizer, and they have submitted home rule petitions to the legislature to basically get permission to do so. We have not, we're trying to do something short of that. We're trying to do this, what I've described. We want there to be a very significant, education campaign in Falmouth about this. And, there's a few other things that we're talking about. So that's essentially what we are envisioning, the system we're envisioning. And we would really like to get the endorsement of this committee for the direction we're going in, even if it's not, precisely the same system. And we want your advice about all this. And we would also look for other committees in town, and of course the select board, and eventually, if we need to go to town meeting, get approval for this.
Do you envision this as a bylaw?
Probably part of the other thing that I think I mentioned last time is that we have drafted a revision of Chapter 237, the nitrogen bylaw, which we would rename the fertilizer bylaw or the nitrogen and phosphorus bylaw. I know that I've shared it with some of you and shared it with Kristen, and I am planning to meet with Maura O'Keefe, the town legal counsel, to review that proposal. In the discussions that I've had with Peter Johnson Staub, he agrees that the bylaw should be revised, but while we're at it, he said we should probably work in some registration and enforcement system. If we're going to bother to revise the bylaw, let's have a bylaw that is going to have some impact. So yeah, I do envision this being part of a bylaw.
I was going to say, you've got to get to Maura and make sure she likes
Yeah.
the wording.
Yeah, she and I have spoken, and she understands what we're talking about.
Okay. I mean, this committee has heard before and has wrestled with the fact that, fertilizer management is needed, better than we're doing. And that as we make watershed plans, we're going to need to make some commitment as to where we're at with fertilizers. So we have some time before we've got watershed plans, but it'd be good to make motion on fertilizers between now and when we start writing the plans, so we have not hopes, but have something more concrete when we're ready to go. I don't care which end I start. I'll start with, down with you. Concerns, questions, comments on what was passed out before?
Well, yeah, I think the revision of the bylaw is excellent. I was wondering about the idea of having, so, as you said, some places they're trying to completely prohibit.
Right.
I was wondering about the idea of having some kind of, we have a town shellfish license, we have a town dump permit, maybe we could have a town fertilizing permit where you'd have to sign off on some version of this. And if you did have a property within 100 feet of the water body, maybe then you'd not be eligible for such a permit.
Right.
That sort of thing. That would, because, enforcement has certainly been an issue. So that's the one thing that goes through my mind.
Yep.
Ed?
Mike, have you had any discussion on increasing that 100-foot limitation? Reason I ask is multiple. I know of some other towns, and I don't remember
Right.
which ones, but are looking to.
Mashpee's done it.
300, I think, and maybe they're gonna go to 5. I think I've heard as much as 1,000 feet as a proposal. I mentioned at the last meeting, just before that meeting, Bourne Town Meeting had approved a directive to their select board to put something together to approach the legislator to get the okay to develop a fertilizer bylaw. So this is getting traction in more towns just than Falmouth, and I think it's great that your committee is taking some initiative, but I would like to just throw out the suggestion that that distance be increased.
Yeah.
Just anecdotally, in the past few weeks, as I meander around town, primarily along Little Pond, we've spent a lot of dollars to sewer that area and improve the pond, and it's improved greatly. Ken has presented the data showing that, It's visually clear, it doesn't smell. We hadn't seen mad algae for years. We saw some this spring. Short duration, very localized to one area. And I look at it and I scratch my head and say, what's different about this area? Runoff. It's fertilizer. Because of the topography in that area, you have probably a half a mile in radius of properties that are sloped to that little cove on the pond.
Right.
Where the algae mat's prevalent. And that's the only place on that entire pond that it happens right now. The only one. It used to be much more widespread. It would look like a green carpet out there, almost half the pond. Now it's isolated to that little cove. But all the properties with these lovely green lawns, this spring they got that fertilizing and bam, it hit. It hit hard. And if looking down Grand Avenue, which kind of runs into that section of pond, there's probably a half-hour area that is sloped right to it. And there's no catch basins, so it's just like injecting it right into the veins like a drug. And that's a problem. I mean, I would be in favor of an outright ban. I know that's radical and crazy, but, you know, I'm radical and crazy. But I think we ought to give serious consideration to increasing that distance, so.
Yeah.
That's my thoughts. I think it's a great first step. I think the idea of registering and making sure people that are doing this commercially know what they're doing and are not using they're using the slow release. I think it's a great first step. Good work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. I think it's a reasonable idea. I just have 3 questions. About, if you stay with 100 feet, do you have any idea what % of Falmouth properties would be flagged?
I don't know.
I
I don't know. I think it's the people who get the letter, right? I think it's,
I think it's a relevant part of the discussion.
Yeah.
If you want the town to make a decision.
yeah, I know
You
it's
have to say
I know
who
it's
it's gonna
thousands of
affect.
homes.
And in fact, I would love to see a map, and the map could show the 100 feet and the 1,000 feet in 2 different colors or dotted lines or something. And on the retail sales, I was confused when I was reading it. Is it just a record of how much the various vendors have sold, or are they keeping a list of who they sold it to?
No, it's a record of what they have sold, not to whom. Trying to get a sense of how much fertilizer is being sold and applied in Falmouth.
John?
I had just one question, and I may have misunderstood. Was the idea that the regulation would cover all the nitrogen-sensitive areas of town?
That's our thinking,
So then the 100 feet becomes irrelevant.
right?
So if you simplify things by saying the regulation is going, the bylaw is going to cover all the nitrogen-sensitive areas in town,
Then the setback doesn't matter,
setback is irrelevant.
right? Do you think it should cover all the nitrogen-sensitive areas, this regulation?
That takes into most of your freshwater ponds.
Yeah,
It seems to me that's a simple way to do it, and then not have to have a huge discussion about whether we're talking about 100 feet or 200 feet or 500.
right,
That's-
yeah.
Kim, your goal today, I mean, are you looking for endorsement of this general idea of where it's headed, or would you rather wait for a more specific?
I think we're looking for a general idea of where we're headed, a general, endorsement of where we're headed, because we
Okay.
need to have more conversation at the Freshwater Pond Advisory Committee.
Yeah.
And I want to have conversations with the town legal counsel to get this right. And then come back to you and maybe some other committees, maybe the Conservation Commission, Board of Health, other folks, with a more refined proposal,
Yeah.
recommendation.
Yeah, I think, I can't speak for the whole committee, but I think we'd be more comfortable if nothing else, we had a list of 3 or 4, even, God forbid, a half dozen bulleted points that spelled out exactly the goal of the project and where it's headed. I think. I mean, I would like it to be a little bit more definitive, I guess. I mean, I think a bunch of us can agree that in principle, this looks like a really, really good idea.
I mean, if you said this is a really bad idea, like, and you tore this apart, that would be very, we would really reconsider.
Right, yeah.
But I'm not hearing that this is like an insane idea, a crazy idea.
Right, exactly. But I
That's
think
helpful.
I think as far as a formal sort of stage one endorsement,
Right.
that's what I'm thinking I'd be more comfortable with if it
Yeah.
called out a few specific talking points in the
Right.
proposal.
Right. Yeah, I think we're looking to hear from you sort of whether you think the direction we're going in and this sort of concept makes sense. We also are interested, we have talked about the idea of a ban. You were at the discussion. And that, Orleans and Nantucket have come to the conclusion that regulation is not going to do it. So they have gone further. And we're trying to see whether this system of having companies actually have to register. And Nantucket seems to have a very good, I've spoken to them, they seem to have very good results with this. So we're trying this first step.
I think it's a great idea, Kim, but I'm always concerned about the homeowner who can do the workaround by applying it themselves. So I wonder you talked about the retail sales being recorded in terms of amount, but if they also had access to this map-based system that identifies homes that are, within the 100 feet or whatever the depth or distance from the sensitive areas will be, if they could then say, no, you show me your license, your address, whatever, and if you're in violation of that distance, maybe the sale can't be made. Or something that restricts the ability of homeowners who will not use a lawn service because they're not going to do this anymore from actually doing it themselves, because it's pretty easy to spread fertilizer.
Yeah, I think we have sort of shied away of that sort of restraint of trade and getting into telling a business that they can't sell a product. It's different than applying the product. And I'd be interested to hear what Maura would have to say about that. The other side here is the enforcement. And if a homeowner is applying it themselves and applying it in violation of the regulation, then we've got to find some way to get the authorities to enforce this. When this fertilizer regulation Chapter 237 was enacted and passed by town meeting in 2012, the Department of Natural Resources in Falmouth was the enforcement entity. They no longer exist, so it was given off to the Marine Environmental Sciences, which I guess is a department that was created as a successor. But there's no enforcement. So I think we do have to figure out, and that's not just for the Falmouth Freshwater Pond Advisory Committee to think about, but I think the select board should be thinking about it, and town manager should be thinking about it, and like, how do we, if people are speeding in town, they get a ticket, or they get a warning. If someone's littering, and authority sees it, hopefully they'll get, fined. So I think the idea with having the vendors record what they've sold is to give all of us, including you, an idea of how much fertilizer is being applied in town. But we didn't want to get between the store owner and the customer.
I think it would only be in the cases where it would be a sale to a home that should not be applying the fertilizer. Other homes, it wouldn't be an issue.
We can try to educate, and talk with the vendors about this, and so that they know, I guess, I don't know about that. I mean, or would we be asking vendors to not sell fertilizer? Would be
Well, you're
asking
asking
asking them
lawn
not to
service
sell to
companies
somebody
not
who-
to apply fertilizer. So either way, you're asking a reduction in a product that people have been using for, many, many years. Whether it happens with the lawn company or with the homeowner, it's the same. You're trying to limit the fertilizer that's going into the ground.
Yeah. Well, the state passes laws saying that, vendors can't sell cigarettes to minors. I don't know if the state would pass a law saying that, or Falmouth could pass a regulation saying that a vendor can't sell to a person whose home is in a nitrogen-sensitive area. That's not for our committee to determine. It's an interesting idea, but I don't know what to do with it exactly.
We heard, I think we heard, maybe it was on the Board of Health, I forget, but at one point, a gentleman came in who talked about, he runs a business, and he talked about, if a person knows what they're doing, they only apply enough fertilizer to be taken up by the plants, and it doesn't get to the groundwater. So I think the part in there where you want to, get people to register or whatever is an excellent beginning point to make sure that if somebody's, set aside the homeowner doing it, if somebody's running a business and fertilizing or whatever, that they should know what they're doing and not be over-fertilizing. It occurs to me that when people suggested we needed to get rid of plastics at takeout, that there was quite a bit of pushback from various individuals, and a working group was put together to go through it. I would encourage you to reach out to landscapers who are,
Yeah.
are responsible, work with them to get to the point where it's something that they can do, that you're not putting too many layers in there, and get them on board to, educate and help, get them to be part of the process, rather than the person we're looking to find.
Yeah.
Okay?
I think that was a great process, and we have talked at our committee about forming a working group that brings in landscapers and different stakeholders to have, modeled on that working group that formulated the plastics reduction bylaw.
Yeah, because like I say, this gentleman came in and he was like, don't put a ban in, because those of us that know what we're doing are responsible. Make everybody be responsible, was his message.
Right.
So, Ken, you had another point?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to reinforce what I was trying to drive at, which kind of goes to what Jonathan was saying. It's a little ambiguous here. The bylaw, that revision that you handed out, says no person. It does not say you are a landscaper or, so what I was trying to get at is if I, as a homeowner, go to Eastman's and want to buy a bag of fertilizer, I got to give them my town permit that shows that I have, some awareness. And if my address is in such that a lot, that I own a lot that should not receive fertilizer, I cannot get a town permit.
So just like you get a permit from the dump or the transfer station, you get a permit from the town.
It's a little more
To
restrictive.
apply
but it's not
fertilizer.
Total prohibition.
Right.
Maybe you could get away with it. I don't know.
They'll just go to.
I mean, we all heard, I remember when this first came up, the point was made by many of the landscape companies that do this. We're not the guys applying too much fertilizer, it's the homeowners. And, if a little is good, more must be better to get your lawn growing. And I think that was a good point,
Yeah.
because
That's an interesting idea, yeah. I'll talk to Maura about that one, too.
Ed wants to say something.
He always does. But, trying to go after the retailers and say, here's my Falmouth permit so I can buy this, heck, they'll go across the line to Mashpee or Bourne, or they'll go to Home Depot
We
and
don't
Wareham.
have
That's,
that.
that's not the place to do it. I think, a couple of years ago, while Eric was still chair, there was a meeting of this committee, and that was on the agenda, and there were some very well-spoken landscape contractors, professionals, that made the points that our chairman just made. They know what they're doing. The fact remains that some of the greenest lawns I see are right on the water. Go along West Falmouth Harbor.
Right.
Go along Little Pond. And darn few of those homeowners are interested in taking a spreader out of the garage and spreading it. It's a professional that probably isn't aware that within 100 feet of that water body, you are not allowed to ever put any fertilizer. That's what the bylaw says. None, zero, never.
Right.
And that's why I say, maybe that ought to be 500 feet or 1,000 feet, but that's where the majority of it will happen. That's the low-hanging fruit. The other outliers where, the guy's gonna go and get a couple of bags of, Scott's highest nitrogen stuff and spread it, that's gonna be pretty hard to get. So then it's the PR campaign, resurrect the old Falmouth Friendly Lawn campaign. A green lawn, especially near a water body, is a badge of shame. It's not pretty, it's ugly. And that, I think, the PR component is where it's gotta happen, to say, hey, the environmental police are gonna go knocking on doors and finding people, and we're gonna go after the retailer. No, it's not gonna fly. I think you gotta look at the practicality of it. And I think education is a key part of that.
Yeah, I see chem lawn and green lawn, chem lawn and true green trucks driving all over town. I would like to think that they know where they're supposed to fertilize and not fertilize, and that they're, applying slow release and all that. I don't know if that's true. I think a lot of the fertilizing is done by these small outfits, who just landscapers, and I don't know what they know, and what they know, if they know where the restrictions are, what the restrictions are. I'm not confident about that. In Nantucket, there are over 100 companies have registered, and they actually have to take this online course. It's like a 15-minute thing, certify that they have read it, understand it, and I think that there's a learning process that we can engage these landscapers in. I think it's really important. But yeah, the public campaign, the PR campaign is really important.
Do you get any feedback from Nantucket where there's nitrogen values in ponds before and after they've implemented this? And is there a
They
reduction?
feel like they have seen reductions in fertilizer use. I haven't asked them whether they see impacts on ponds, but they definitely, the Board of Health people that I talk to there say they see a significant reduction in fertilizer use and a lot more conversation on the island about fertilizer.
I'm going to open it up to members of the audience who would like to speak to this issue. Take the gentleman in the back first. And just give your name when you come to the mic, so.
My name is Rich Bradley, Precinct 7. I'm a landscaper, and I'm also with the Green Industry Alliance. And my question for this gentleman would be, did he talk to MDR about this yet?
No, not yet. But I haven't talked to them about this, but we understand what they have permitted with the bylaw.
Kim,
Okay.
you need to go to that microphone over there, okay?
Yeah, and I don't really
We'll
want
start,
to
we're not going to debate. He asked you a question, and
Yeah.
you're trying to say
I
either,
haven't spoken with MDR.
Okay.
I think it's a yes or no answer.
Yeah,
Because there's a nutrient law,
right.
and they are the enforcement authority. And I'm not a lawyer, so I don't remember the year. It might have been 2012 or 2015. There was a window that you could make a bylaw or whatever, and that's why Falmouth was one that made that bylaw.
Right.
And then after that period, you're done. You can't. It's the MDR is the sole authority on fertilizer. And the way it works in like the real world, it's great to come up with this stuff, is there's good suppliers and bad suppliers. Like, a couple of them that come to mind is Atlantic Turf and Golf, Harrell's. They're gonna ask you for a pesticide license before they even will sell you anything. And as a commercial applicator of fertilizer, you have to keep records for that. There's not too many that do that. I don't know how many there is now. There used to be like 3 or 4 pesticide inspectors for the whole state. Anything with the EPA number, you cannot apply unless you have a license. And any homeowner can apply that without a license. So the homeowner is probably your biggest problem, number one. And then enforcement, it's not there. Even on the professional level, there's people that are applying stuff that aren't licensed. I was at a site yesterday, there was fertilizer all over the place. Some landscaper came there and applied to this property, and it's all over the sidewalk, and professionals don't do that. Mostly, I would say, pesticide applicators, because they're held to a higher standard. They're gonna make sure that gets blown off, and they're gonna use a higher quality fertilizer. And you're gonna have a problem with this whole thing, because people, like somebody said about Home Depot, they're gonna go to Home Depot and buy it. So you're really not gonna, it's not an accurate representation of how much fertilizer's being put out. And my other question, you said a significant amount, that you think that the fertilizer is a significant amount to the pollution. What percentage do you put that at?
I think it varies depending on the pond and.
I'm gonna try to get your answer. Kristen, you might have this, when we look at the MEP reports, don't they have like a 8 or 9?
They're all broken out by different watersheds. I would say a good average would be maybe 15 to 18%.
15 to 18.
Way high, you're way wrong.
More?
It's less than 5%. It's less than 5. And like all those water reports, whatever those reports are you talking about, do they test for fertilizer?
They calculated based on the green space of the lawn and the average fertilizer application that was being used and the number of single-family homes and averaged it
Yeah, so
into
they're
their
guessing.
model.
It's a guess.
Yep.
Yeah, a lot of parts of
In
this.
Florida, they did a test. I'm not a chemist, so.
In Florida?
I think it was an isotope of nitrogen. There's a difference between a fertilizer isotope and septic and birds and all that. Because birds are like a huge, because I know Chuck and I talked about this. He wanted to have a bird feeding bylaw, and they did the cormorants or something. Those things put so much, I think it's and then somebody said the geese are 5 pounds a day they poop or something. I don't know. It's a huge amount. So fertilizer's less than 5%. So, I would suggest you start with MDR and talk to them first. And it's gonna be a tough battle to get enforcement and get people to comply. I guarantee, when you're driving around and you look at landscapers' trucks, you're gonna see a tank on the back, a pump bottle. It's probably got Roundup in it, and I guarantee that 2% have a license to put that out. They're everywhere. And that is use, that's a $1,000 fine, first offense, $10,000 per occurrence after that. So,
Do you know of any enforcement action that MDR has ever taken? Do you know in your business, is there
oh
someone?
yeah, they'll come out and look at records once in a while, but mostly on the pesticides.
Yeah, I'm talking about the enforcement side. Have they actually enacted penalties
Oh, yeah.
and made them stick?
Fines. For pesticides, I don't know about the nutrient side.
Yeah,
That's why you need to talk to them.
yeah.
I think it's Taryn.
I think you're gonna run into the same problem of enforcement. And as far as I know, local regulations can regularly, just like state regulations can exceed federal regulations, local regulations are not allowed to be looser than state regulation, but they can be tighter, stricter.
So that's my 2 cents to start off with, and we'll just see where it goes from here.
Yeah,
Well, I think when I was referencing somebody speaking to us before, it was you,
yeah.
Probably was me.
okay? So thank you for paying attention and coming back again and keeping
Thank
us
you.
informed. Next. And sir, in the gray, I got you next.
First of all, I want to thank Kim Comart and the Fresh Ponds Committee for taking on this. I've been involved in this discussion before, and I know the Board of Health has looked at it. This committee has, addressed it and made some attempts at it before, but I feel like the Freshwater Committee has really, tried to hash something out that works and put a lot of thought and a lot of effort into it. I want to thank you guys for that. It's a monumental task. I think everyone in this room knows just how monumental, just nutrient pollution in general, like changing people's perceptions and the culture and their understanding of these very intricate, issues is very difficult for the average person. Like, we've all been involved in this discussion for years, and we have an understanding. But even our understanding, like this gentleman that works in the trade has a better understanding than many, probably most of us, So people like him coming in to speak is so important because he brings another perspective. He brings knowledge from the working tradespeople that are doing this, and some of my concerns are, some of the issues we saw with like the plastic bottle bans, like Falmouth outlawed water bottles and nips, and people just go to Mashpee or Bourne and buy those. And then it puts Falmouth businesses at a disadvantage. I don't want to see, I go to Eastman's Hardware. It's my family's been going there since I was a boy, and they're very smart, they're very intelligent, they're very respectful, and, but I don't want to see them disadvantaged because they can't sell fertilizer or they have to do this extra effort, and then people are just going over the bridge, going to Wareham, going to Lowe's or Home Depot, buying it just at the register at self-checkout, boom, and, we're losing that revenue. It's already tough for small businesses in Falmouth. But the other thing was, Ed's comments. I appreciate your comments, Ed. Talking about stormwater runoff. I think this committee, really should start looking at stormwater runoff. One of my close friends is on the conservation district, and he brought it to my attention that the town of Falmouth hasn't been really going after those funds that are available for stormwater management. If that site that you noticed was, had a stormwater management, like I think they call it a green ladder, where the water is diverted back and forth, so the grass absorbs some of that nitrogen and phosphorus before it goes into the local waterways or a catch basin. Those things could be low-hanging fruit and like cheap options to reduce the nitrogen and nutrients in our watersheds. So,
Matt, stay on fertilizer.
I am staying on fertilizer. I was just going to say, this is just part of the puzzle. Stormwater runoff is part of the puzzle. I'm glad this is being addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
Sir?
Hey, good evening, committee. My name is Greg Nickel. I'm a Falmouth resident. I live on 19 Woodneck Road. I'm also the vice president of Harrell's Fertilizer Company, based out of Lakeland, Florida. But our plants are down in Sylacauga, Alabama, Lakeland, Florida. But we were a part of the BMPs and building the BMPs in Nantucket. So we're the largest distributor throughout the country, especially within the golf course and in the landscape market. So, and we primarily sell to professionals. We do not sell to Lowe's or Home Depot or residential areas. So we sell to the professionals, as some of my constituents here were saying earlier. So the progress that Nantucket has made has been significant. And so kudos to you and your committee. And if there's anything that I can do to assist you, I'd be willing to share with you the processes that we went through, the success, some of the setbacks, and but more or less, this is this is a great way to start it and having a conversation, letting everyone understand what's going on, because fertilizer can be, when we try to eat healthy, we call it vitamins, we call it fruits and vegetables, et cetera, right? And then, or even medicine. But, pesticides are a medicine, but we challenge them with these dirty words. But if they're used appropriately in the right settings, then everybody wins. But it's the bad actors, and it's for those people who don't necessarily know what they're doing. And when you have a homeowner that wants to fertilize their lawn, and they're spreading it out there before a large rainstorm that we're gonna probably get tomorrow, it's all that runoff that hits it. They're spreading, most of that fertilizer might be hitting a roadway, on their driveway, they're not going out with a blower, and those are the products that are going into our storm drains. So the professionals know what they're doing, and I'd be glad to assist you and your committee. And I have a great wealth of folks who can also assist. I mean, we have a number of PhDs on staff and can help answer a lot of the tough questions. So, but thank you very much, and thank you to the committee
Thank you for stepping up.
for discussing.
Yeah, that's great. The gentleman in the back row. I apologize, I have new faces in here, so I don't know everybody's name yet.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Bob Mann. I'm from Sandwich. So for the purposes of this committee, we'll just say that I'm from wicked East Falmouth, and that way, I have jurisdiction. So my day job is I'm the Senior Director of Technical and Regulatory Affairs for the National Association of Landscape Professionals, and one of my night jobs is on the Board of Directors of the Massachusetts Association of Lawn Care Professionals. And I just wanted to bring you up to date or just flesh out some of the issues that we're talking about here tonight. The first being that back in 2012, the legislature took up an amendment to Chapter 262 to insert nutrient management regulations for the use of fertilizers, both in agricultural settings and in non-agricultural settings. And in that legislation, they mandated that any regulations that were put into place had to be anchored in best management practices that were published by the University of Massachusetts. So in doing that, as the science evolves as to how nutrients are used or how they act in the environment, the university can make changes in their recommendations, and then we, as the regulated community, have to adhere to that. Now, we're not anti-regulation by any means. We are more than happy to abide by regulations that are anchored in science, and that is the reason that we were so invested in passing that piece of legislation, and then in doing the regulations as well. Also within Chapter 262, the state reserved itself the entire body of the entire field of regulation. So cities and towns in Massachusetts are preempted from regulating fertilizer beyond what the state says, what the state says. So that's why you see, towns like Orleans, Harwich, Nantucket going to the legislature and trying to do a home rule petition saying we wish to be excluded from this preemption. That's something that we are opposed to, not because we're opposed to regulation, but we're opposed to doing things on an ad hoc basis. And as you noticed in some of the commentary that, say, well, we can just buy fertilizer somewhere besides Falmouth. I can guarantee you that all the golf courses and all the lawn care companies are not buying their fertilizer in Falmouth. They're coming from Sylacauga, Alabama, and things of that nature. So you're missing out on a great bulk of the volume of fertilizer that comes into town. Now, as far as what's applied, when it's applied, where it's applied, all of those things are addressed in the regulations. So in other words, if, back when I was in the lawn care business, if I pulled up in front of your house, Ken, and did an application of fertilizer, I have to record all those things, just as I would with, the pesticides that I would use. All of that becomes part of the record that, that I keep. let me stop there, because I could go on for an hour on this, believe me, it's a lot of fun. But I will notice that when this came up for a debate in Nantucket, it resulted in a fist fight. And I don't want any of that to happen here. So, it's good to have a good conversation. So any questions, I'm happy to answer for
I
you.
would say, given your size, taking a fist fight with you is not be the right
Oh,
thing
you
to
should
do.
have seen the guy then, it was all on TV, it was amazing.
I just want, this is a procedural thing I need. We have on our agenda the Tufts folks tonight, correct?
Yeah,
How much time do they need?
it's like 15 minutes.
Okay. This is a graduate student thing that they have to do a
Okay,
public
yeah.
presentation. I just didn't want to, this conversation is good, I just want to make sure I reserve time for them, that's all.
Sure.
Are you open to questions? Is that
Oh,
what it's
absolutely. Lay them on me.
Yeah, there's a giant hole in the MDR regulations.
That being,
Virtually nothing concerning localized applications to bodies of water. It says 20 feet. 20 feet, one car length, right? And it says nothing about environmentally sensitive landscapes. It's basically, you could drive anywhere you want in there and not run afoul of their regulations.
well, okay, my answer, I'm sorry, did you finish?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it's just,
So-
my point is the regulations are sort of an empty shell as far as nutrients go. Pesticides, they probably have some pretty good stuff, but the nutrient regulations are sadly lacking, particularly for the situations we're trying to deal with here locally. We have severely compromised coastal embayments directly related to nutrient loading of those basins.
Right.
And there has to be a workaround.
So
I mean, Amherst is great, but they may not know what's happening in Cape Cod this afternoon.
Oh, they absolutely do. And
Yeah, okay.
so the regulations, you can't apply anything to frozen or snow-covered soil.
Yep.
You can't apply anything to saturated soil or soils that are frequently flooded. Within 20 feet of any waterway, using the broadcast method is another, if you're using a targeted method. You can't apply within a zone 1 of a public water supply within 100 feet of the surface water, or that is used for public drinking, or in amounts that exceed the UMass guidelines. So that's what it really gets to, is how much are you applying at any one particular point in time? Because if you over-apply, that if you apply more than what the lawn can be reasonably expected to take up over a period of time, then that opens you up to the possibility that it will either leach, which is the downward movement of the of nutrients through the soil, or runoff, which is the lateral movement. Now, that's what you were talking about earlier. Said, is there a potential for fertilizer that is applied to a lawn to run off and get into a body of water? And that's why we get into talking about sanitation when we're working on fertilization. We have devices on fertilizer spreaders that keep it from going onto impervious surfaces, streets, walkways, that kind of thing. The second thing we do is, we carry blowers with us so that if anything happens to get onto the surface, that we blow it back up onto the lawn. But then I want you to do a little thought experiment, because this is a great time of year to do this. At least this is true on my front lawn. My dogs will go outside, and of course it's time to relieve themselves, lift the leg, and they'll squirt out some urine and let it go. The urine, which is also we have in common with mammals, all mammals use urine in order to remove nitrogen from our bodies, is using the exact same molecule of nitrogen that we use in fertilizer, urea, urine. The urea is the nitrogen source in fertilizer that we use in lawns, and urine has that same exact molecule. That's why you see these little dog spots show up, and if you have a dog spot that has a little brown area in the center of it, that's analogous to a fertilizer burn. And then you work out from that, and it's an area bright green. That's the grass is going crazy because there was nitrogen in the urine. But what you'll notice is those dog spots don't move. They don't move laterally, or they just stay right where they are. The analogy is meant to show that once the fertilizer becomes incorporated into the turfgrass system, gets watered in, gets taken up by the plant, it simply isn't going to go anywhere. Very, very little of that fertilizer escapes the turf grass system. Now, we're getting back to the best management practices, because just like anything else, you know, we can go to the restaurant and have way too much food, like me, you know, overeat, and then, of course, we get into problems. But that's the entire point behind the best management practices, is to only give the lawn as much as it reasonably can be expected to eat at one particular time.
Steve?
Can I just ask you a technical question?
Sure.
I'm very familiar with dog spots. I've
Yes.
owned several Labrador retrievers.
Oh, God.
I don't think your analogy proves that nothing goes straight down. It proves that it doesn't go laterally at the grass level, but it doesn't prove that nothing goes straight down.
There's a great deal of research that looks into that, and I'm happy to, you know, to provide that, but I have a quotation that I use, and it's, despite seemingly favorable conditions, fertilizer, irrigation, disturbed soil, for nutrient loss from turfgrass ecosystems, very little nutrient and sediment runoff has been measured from properly maintained and correctly fertilized turfgrass. And then that is something that's been, you know, comes right out of the literature.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm just being nitpicking that the
Okay,
dog
and I don't
analogy
mind
doesn't work.
nitpicking, you know, we're here to.
Do not encourage them. Do not encourage them.
Can I? I'm interested in what the other gentleman said about the nitrogen isotopes, because that seems to be a really good way to quantify the sources of the nitrogen, and maybe we're making much ado about nothing, or maybe not, but I've never even considered that. Have you looked into that, and do you have like papers you could recommend to us to look so we can get a more quantitative approach to what the ultimate sources of nitrogen are, rather than just assuming it's coming from this source or that source?
I could dredge up some work that was done down in Florida that looked at that, to try to differentiate between nitrogen applied as fertilizer versus nitrogen that comes from septic or waterfowl, that type of thing. It was done by a gentleman that did a study here on Cape Cod looking at pesticides that escaping golf course systems. Mm-hmm. So he has some familiarity with this area as well. I'm not going to answer any further than that, because I don't recall, you know, right off the top of my head what his results were.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm picking up with where you're at, Jonathan. You know, we have in place people that are sampling in the estuaries on a regular basis, you know, so many times a month, and it goes out, and if there is a way to speciate and be able to start quantifying better, I mean, you offered your guess at it. You know,
Exactly.
It'd be great to be able to look at it and say, you know, we're seeing this, you know, might be one estuary's got more than another. Then we can start focusing on where to get better management.
You know, I think everybody would agree, the problem is not a really well-trained professional landscaper. Professional, those who follow the best management practices, those that use the proper product in the proper amount at the right time of year. We all see them all over town. There's a whole bunch of folks that they got a pickup truck and they got a stack of, 20 bags of Turf Builder Plus. And they're just throwing that with reckless abandon, and then the rains come. And if it was done correctly by a trained professional, it's not a problem. They'll know how much and when to put it down. It's the poorly trained, untrained, unqualified, I will say, individuals, and very few of them are homeowners. The cheapest guy, I'm gonna hire him. Hey, it's a guy with a pickup truck, he puts fertilizer. That's what's happening, and that's, if you look at our teeny lots that are right near the ponds and right near the estuaries, that are the greenest grass you ever wanna see, that's where the problem is. And because when that rain hits and you got a 20, 30 degree slope, and they're all heading towards that street street is then directed right at that pond or right at that estuary, therein lies, that shot of nitrogen that all of a sudden you got an algae bloom, now you got brown or green or really ugly opaque water.
Sure.
That's what I think this attempt that our pond advisory group is trying to make. Register anybody that is hired to put nitrogen, a fertilizer or a pesticide, but nitrogen is our goal, to make sure they know what they're doing, that they're following the regs, and that they're reporting what they're doing, so we get an idea of how much. And then you could take that backwards and say, well, wait a minute, why so many tons when the total square foot of grass is only this? Somebody's not following best management practices. So I think it is outstanding that folks like yourself and these other gentlemen that are professionals have come tonight to educate us all on what is possible, what should be done and can be done. Thanks for your participation.
I'm going to put Kim on the spot momentarily, but not really. I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, when Mr. Robinson showed up in town and started picking up on, our recycling habits and our litter habits and everything, he went from saying, people need to change what they're doing a little bit, and he's now like a regular columnist in the Enterprise, where he talks about and he's incrementally getting people to do the next step and the next step and the next step. I'm hearing back and forth, the professionals know what they're doing, the homeowners appear not to know what they're doing. So I'm going to encourage you that maybe one of the things that you could do is maybe figure out how to start, regularly putting something in the Enterprise saying, hey, homeowners who put down their own fertilizer are part of the problem. Here's, I think, read this label, do whatever. Just, start to get that campaign going, Kim, okay? Please do.
Yeah, quickly. So the Enterprise recently agreed to have a column every 4 weeks that is penned by the Freshwater Pond Advisory Committee or the Falmouth Pond Coalition. 2 weeks ago, the column was about fertilizer. It's exactly that. So the Enterprise is a great, forum for this. We need, I think, Alan and his folks have done a great job. One of the benefits has been that, now you have a bin that you have to put all your recycling in. And pretty soon you're going to have a bin that you have to put all of your trash in. And so, the town, so there's been very good cooperation from the town to help, not just educate people, but to actually require them to do certain things. So we need cooperation from the town in addition to this education. So it's a process.
Richard? It is Richard, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I think he said something in the proposed thing about phosphorus too. And phosphorus is not in fertilizer in Massachusetts unless you do a soil test. That's what you're supposed to do. So like homeowners are just gonna throw down whatever they get, and they have no idea what they're doing. And there's a lot of landscape companies that are in that boat. A guy that mows the lawn, oh yeah, I can put that out for you. But he has no idea how it works in the soil. And I would recommend that the gentleman behind you there, is you reach out to them. They have excellent, I think the best, like education and research and people with all kinds of doctorate degrees and that stuff, and they deal with the golf courses. And a lot of the golf courses are all Audubon certified and all that. That would be your best resource, I think. But that, I just wanted to mention that about the phosphorus, that there shouldn't be any phosphorus unless it's sufficient, which is like almost never.
Okay. Anybody else in the audience care to speak to this issue? Peter?
Peter Hargraves. It seems like it's becoming a tradition to thank the host. This is an especially great forum. I've never seen so many on-target resources and having this discussion. So I left my point of view at my seat, and I have a couple of questions for understanding. Because I heard somebody say, Richard, that 5% of the problem, I assume we're talking about nitrogen from fertilizer. and then I heard Kristen say 15 to 18. So one of my 2 or 3 quick questions is, how much of the nitrogen problem, phosphorus aside, is from fertilizers versus other places, as an estimate or in models, the best estimate we have?
Steve, I'm looking at the Mass Estuaries Project, study of Little Pond as an example, okay?
Yeah.
I have the
I'm gonna let,
figure in front of me.
I'm gonna let you go to, just to help Peter out here. So in the MEP stuff, there are what, they distinguish between things that can be controlled and things that can't be controlled. And I think fertilizer, they thought, was controllable.
Yes, but, so you have to think about it in 2 ways. One is what's applied to the watershed, what's applied to the land. And 2 is what makes it to the shore. So in terms of the Mass Estuaries Project, where they did a careful analysis of amount of lawns and average application rates and so forth and so on, and they came up with their best estimate for the estuary portion of the Little Pond, it was about 11% was applied to the land. That's what they call the unattenuated load.
So it could be less that makes it through, it won't be more.
Much less. Only about 10% of that makes it to the shore. There's various, depending on how far away you are. Some of it gets tied up in the turf, some of it gets tied up or removed in transit in the aquifer.
So if I'm understanding.
Much more of the septic load reaches the shore because the septic load is released below the active soil layer. There's no interception by vegetation, there's no uptake. So that's one of the reasons the septic load is always so much higher as a proportion of what reaches the estuary.
So just to be sure I understand what you just said, Ken, then 11% of the nitrogen problem is applied, but what actually reaches the water body is maybe 1% of the nitrogen problem.
It's lower, whether it's 1%, I'm just telling you what the unattenuated load estimate from the MEP is 11%. That's what they use as a regulatory limit, because they didn't assume attenuation. But published studies have shown that there is significant attenuation of that. And one way you can look at that is you can put a device called a lysimeter below the active soil layer. I've done this in my own lawn. And see how much nitrogen percolates into the soil solution at depth. There is definite attenuation along the way.
Well, I didn't want to start a research project.
Yeah, I know.
Grant money
I
is
understand.
thin
But
these
that
days.
is, people do know this stuff.
Okay,
People
so,
have
well, that's why
studied
I'm
it.
asking. It sounds like we know
But
it's
if
11%.
if you have a lot right next to the shore, and you're putting tons of fertilizer on your lawn, it's making it through that active soil layer and it's getting to the shore.
Well, patience,
You're
I'm trying to
over-fertilizing.
I'm trying to get above the treetops, because we've been trimming a lot of treetops in here with the discussion. Is the second part of the question then is, if 11% is unattenuated, then how much of that do we know? If that's 100% of the nitrogen from fertilizers is an 11% of the nitrogen problem, then what percentage is from golf courses, agriculture, and homeowners?
Yeah, well, these are watershed-wide numbers.
So, but I would submit that the homeowner is a minor fraction of a fraction, and that the other unregulated or unable to be controlled sources like agriculture and golf courses, like this gentleman said, are covered in Massachusetts general law. I'm for doing something about controlling the nitrogen problem, but I'm not much for standing up and waving a flag if it isn't going to solve anything. I said I was going to leave my point of view out the chair. I just brought it up to the dais.
So the one watershed plan that has been submitted to the state and been approved is the one for, it's not Pleasant Bay, what is it?
Pleasant Bay.
Pleasant Bay. And a key component of that was changing the approach to fertilization on a couple of golf courses. In fact, really cutting back on it. And they've hit their 5-year mark, and they've actually seen some benefit from it. So on each of the watersheds, when we get to the plans, which we haven't yet to go to town meeting to fund to do, there needs to be an evaluation of what is the ranges, what's in each watershed and what may or may not be contributing. We're talking in a general format right now. Kim's focus is at the ponds and, you know, the homes that are around our ponds. We have very few ponds that have lush verdant fields around them that are, you know, old growth forests and whatnot, so.
I hear you, but Jonathan said, you know, we have to watch out. I think we're seeing how big the envelope is, but I think we ran off the road a few times in the discussion because we had prohibition in the 20s. We banned nips to get rid of litter, and we didn't ban alcohol. And yes, they can drive out of town to get nip bottles in some other community, but they don't, as a general rule. It has reduced.
Oh, I do.
It has reduced nip litter. I get mine out of town.
No, I don't.
But we found some larger bottles along the roadside. So this whole idea of a complex and costly regulatory system, I think we better keep it in perspective in terms of how much of the problem that we're trying to address here is actually going to be solved by all this effort, and especially when it's so easy to run around the end. Last question. I see on the draft here that all the stuff related to golf courses in 237-5A is crossed off. Has something changed, or did we just decide?
Yeah, Kim Comar. So I have talked to Kristen about it, and I'm going to talk to Maura. I noticed that in the Orleans bylaw, they struck the exemption for golf courses. Kristen pointed out to me that that's because they don't have golf courses, only miniature golf.
What do they do with their time?
So I need to check to see whether Falmouth has the right to remove that exemption for golf courses. I don't know. I know there's
Massachusetts general law doesn't allow it to be controlled.
You need to go to the microphone,
Yeah, so.
okay?
So Kim, I mean, that was said in this meeting tonight, so I don't appreciate the way you just said that, because I think it's clear to me from looking at Massachusetts general law that agriculture and golf courses and other uses are prohibited from local regulation. So if we went after golf courses and by going after Massachusetts general law, then we might actually be accomplishing something in terms of regulating nitrogen. And then instead of having a band playing a tune about doing something that's getting blamed when it's a minuscule contribution, we might actually be making an improvement in the reduction of nitrogen.
If you have something you need to say, Steve.
I
Okay.
was gonna ask
I'm going to try to wrap up this discussion. Kim, you're asking for a sense from this board if we think you're working on the right track. So
Yes.
I'm willing to take a straw vote. Do we feel that Kim is on the right track? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Sort of. See, obviously, the elephant in the room now is that state regulation. If it's illegal to do what you're proposing to do, you got to solve that.
regarding golf courses.
Yeah, but I think one of the gentlemen.
And this
you know,
is
he
a
did-
draft.
Yeah,
that-
one of the gentlemen did point out that a couple
Yeah.
of other communities have tried to go down the home rule petition, and that, you know, checkerboarding rules is not as good as perhaps making a modification back at the state level if that has to happen.
Yeah, although if you talk to the folks at APCC, they actually are encouraging as many communities as possible to ban the use of fertilizer, that the more towns on the Cape do this, the more legislators on the Cape are pushing that on Beacon Hill, and the greater chance we have of getting these home rule petitions enacted, or maybe this law changed at some point.
Okay, thank you, Kim.
Yeah.
We have some students that need to graduate from college. How are we going to set this up? Kristen, you got a thing? I don't know if people looked at or printed out the stuff today. Gentlemen, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.
They're at
They're
Tufts. They're at
virtually
Tufts.
recorded.
They're at
Okay.
Tufts.
There they are.
Yeah, there they are.
So when Ed started talking about a PRB over in Snug Harbor, and we started bouncing the idea off of Alden Brusky from Isotech, who was very much involved with the Shorewood Drive PRB, he is an adjunct professor with Tufts, and the seniors have to do what's called a capstone project, where basically take a real-world environmental issue and come up with what they think would be a solution. So a whole bunch of people throw ideas into the hat, and students get to choose what they want to work on. So this particular group of students, well, not all of them, that's the whole class, decided to take on West Falmouth Harbor. So we fed them the readily available data from some of Ken's work, from the groundwater discharge permit, some of the information that's already out there. So this is the project that these students put together with essentially minimal advising to come up with their ideas for a solution. So, because they weren't coming down here, they already presented, so they already get to graduate, but they wanted the town and the committee to hear what they came up with, because it is pertinent to what the committee's doing. And I can't make it any louder.
Really?
I'm Eric Lundgren, and we're all senior environmental engineers at Tufts, and this is our capstone project. Our capstone project was evaluating mitigation measures for eutrophication in Snug Harbor and Falmouth, Massachusetts. To give a bit of background on the site, Snug Harbor is currently experiencing eutrophication, which is defined as 1 to 2 milligrams of nitrate per liter. The primary sources of nitrate you can see on the map is the septic tanks in the town, and then the wastewater treatment facility. And for both of these sources, you can see the average millions of gallons per year and the concentration of effluent that is flowing into the groundwater and then ending up in the river. The groundwater flow was calculated to be 0.32 feet per day. This is significantly lower than the theoretical 2 feet per day used in regional studies. And the overall objective of our project is to understand the primary sources of nitrate in Snug Harbor, to evaluate mitigation strategies, and to design a cost-effective solution to reduce nitrate concentration 0.25 milligrams per liter to 0.6 milligrams per liter, which is defined as oligotrophic levels.
So as Eric just mentioned, the two main sources of nitrate into Snug Harbor are the wastewater treatment facility and the septic tanks. So our first two design alternatives for our project were upgrading the wastewater treatment facility and upgrading the septic systems. So for upgrading the wastewater treatment facility, we would do this by adding a third sequencing batch reactor, and the result of this upgrade would be mesotrophic levels in the harbor, which is equivalent to around 0.6 milligrams of nitrate per liter. However, this could take up to 25 years for the effects to actually be seen in the harbor, given the slow groundwater velocity from the treatment plant to the harbor. In contrast, the upgrading the septic systems to IA systems would still result in eutrophic levels in the harbor, with nitrogen concentrations greater than 1 milligram per liter. And the septic alternative is a lot more expensive in terms of dollars per kilogram of nitrate removed compared to the wastewater treatment facility. Our next two alternatives are in situ alternatives. So the first one is aquaculture, which involves sugar kelp, so growing 5 100-foot lines in Snug Harbor itself, and then also planting oysters. And the cost of this per kilogram of nitrate removed is shown on the screen here. And then our fourth alternative is installing a permeable reactive barrier using emulsified vegetable oil as the substrate. And this is one alternative that can achieve sub-eutrophic levels in the harbor, which is our goal for this project, with nitrate levels below 0.25 milligrams per liter. and the cost per kilogram of nitrate removed is $920. So here's a map with all of the in situ remediation alternatives put into one figure. So you can see here the aquaculture, the kelp lines, in the harbor, and then the proposed PRV location as well, along the bikeway. And this is a summary table of all alternatives in one table. And here we have the net present value of each alternative over 20 years. So that's the total cost. There's also the amount of nitrate removed in 20 years in kilograms, and then we calculated the cost per kilogram of nitrate removed for each alternative to effectively compare all of these alternatives, and then their resulted trophic state. So as you can see here, the only alternative that gets the harbor down to oligotrophic levels, which is the goal for this project, is the permeable reactive barrier, which is on the lower side in terms of cost, but it's not the cheapest.
So to compare the alternatives, we use the decision matrix, which has these 7 criteria. This decision matrix includes criteria like short-term results, reduction, alternatives. We've also looked at things like costs, so that's our dollar per kilogram of nitrate removed. And lastly, we looked at the longevity of the alternative, the sustainability and resiliency criteria. So as we can see, the PRB has the highest total, so that's 18. So we decided to move forward with the PRB for a more in-depth design.
To determine the mass flux through the PRB, we used the 2017 National Wayne Street PRB transect, and using this, we calculated the mass flux to be approximately 664 grams of nitrate per day. Since the given transect had already been interpolated, the area of each colored region was measured using an image processing software, and the average concentration from the corresponding the bottom figure, or the middle figure. We used Darcy velocity instead of situ velocity for the mass flux calculations, and that was just because the two-dimensional treatment region is not affected by porosity. If the concentration data points for the National Water Transect had been accessible, we would have used the more standard box method rather than what we used. The highest concentration within this region, you can see, is the orange region, which is 17.1 kilograms per liter of nitrate. And to just assume worst case scenario, we just decided to assume that a uniform concentration of 17.1 was uniform throughout the region, and so we just use this for our conditions.
So the primary parameters are the length, depth, and thickness of the PRB, as well as the injection volume. So the length of the PRB is on the area of Stone Harbor where groundwater is entering. The depth is based on the aquifer thickness data that we have. We assume that the thickness is 33 feet. That is the data that we have access to. And then the thickness of the PRB is based on a adjusted residence time of 14 days, and that is about 4.5 feet. So the injection volume is a combination of vegetable oil and then water. First, the volume of vegetable oil is calculated using the ESPCP calculator, which is for the Environmental Research and Development Program, and that basically allows you to input all of the geological conditions, the existing contaminants, and also other chemical species at the site, and then will output how much emulsified vegetable oil is needed as a carbon substrate. Then the injection volume was calculated based on targeting 30% of the effective, or of the forest volume available, and then to make up the difference getting to that injection volume of 230,000 gallons of injection volume, 140,000 gallons of water is needed.
in 3 phases, with the first one being the fieldwork planning. Fieldwork planning means gathering the materials needed, which includes the 90,000 gallons of emulsified vegetable oil, 140,000 gallons of water, and then some other equipment such as a rig and some monitoring equipment. And as mentioned earlier, the range in cost for this will be $2.4 to $3.6 million in net present value. And this includes a 3% contingency rate as well as a 7% return. And then the actual layout of the PRVs will be 2 lines that are 820 feet long each, and these will be spaced 5 feet apart from each other. And this will be located, in our design, it's located along the Shining Sea Bikeway. The injection points along each line are about 2 feet from each other, and they're offset between the 2 lines in order to ensure a well-spread system. There will be 164 injections per line, total out to 328, and at each injection point there will be 701 gallons of emulsified vegetable oil injected. And the biggest image here is an example of the PRV design, in which we can see along the path to the left of it is sort of the injection site. Phase 2 of the implementation plan will be the actual injection period, which will take about 25 days. And this is calculated using a liquid uptake rate of 5 gallons per minute for each injection point. So essentially, if the injection is somewhere 5 gallons per minute, then the entire system will take 25 days to accurately spread. And then along with our design, we recommended that the injection take place during a time of year where there is less bike traffic, to sort of account for community disruption within our design. And the last phase will consist of monitoring the site and actually observing whether groundwater nitrate concentrations were reduced or not, and to reassess the fieldwork plan for the second injection. Basically, within our design, we accounted for a 20-year lifespan, and we recommend a re-injection to occur at the halfway point at 10 years. And the monitoring frequency for the site post-injection is shown in the table below.
So part of the PRV implementation, we looked at the risks. We divided the risks into installation phase. On the left side, we can see the installation risks. We have the hazards in the first column, the severity rating, and the likelihood. So this was from 1 to 3, and with 3 being like worst for severity, and then 1 for likelihood also being a high likelihood. So then we have the risk rating in the third column, and that's severity times likelihood. So a higher rating is worse. And then on the operation phase, we did the exact same thing with the 3 hazards. So quality of PRV, it could be groundwater or daylighting, and we can see that the risk ratings for these hazards are higher than those in the installation phase. So to conclude, we know that the PRV is the only alternative that reduces the nitrate in the harbor to a limited level, which meets our project objective. Although it's not the cheapest option, it is still one of the lower cost alternatives, has minimal risks compared to the other alternatives, and community support funding will be crucial as in our design that we will close the Shining Sea Bikeway.
That's all.
Yay.
Very thorough.
I do have a problem with one of their tables, though.
Only one?
Well,
Only one? Yeah.
they said the EVO, which cost $3 million, would remove 126,000 kilograms, and that works out to $920 per kilogram. I calculated as $23 per kilogram.
So I did reach out to Paul about that, and I didn't get a clarification on that, because Steve Layton also emailed me about that this morning. I don't have their final report. Paul did note to me that their cost estimate for the PRB looked high. I don't know if that's considering the re-injection. So if 3 million was for the first round, and then potentially another 3 million at the 10-year, that I'm not clear on.
Okay.
So if
but
I
I'm
get
just-
clarification, I'll pass that
It's
along.
Yeah,
it's
because I
inconsistent
compared it
within
to
the
the-
table.
You don't have to know any of their prior work.
Right.
Can you take their data as true and the conclusion is wrong?
Right.
Right.
And I compared it to the other numbers they came up with, which are all about right, given the numbers on the table, so.
And they can't hear us now, right?
No.
But you can tell them that since they're gonna be idiot savants like me and Ken, looking at stuff, everything they do for the rest of their life, they should always make sure that there's an idiot savant looking at it before they present it.
Steve, that's called stalking, and you shouldn't be doing it. Can I speak, Steve, to a couple of things here? Under the aquaculture heading, which of course is my white horse that I'm riding off into the sunset, I guess, they didn't place any dollar value on the product of the aquaculture, and it may be that it's economically positive activity, depending on how many oysters you can grow there. They just put it down as a loss.
Well, you've been telling, all the oyster people are telling us it costs the town nothing.
Well, the town
They keep
actually makes
asking
money.
for more money, but they always tell us it doesn't cost anything.
The town makes money off of it. They're not asking
Yeah.
for money from the
Right,
town.
right.
And also in the advanced septic column, it says the septic effluent concentration was reduced from 22 milligrams to 19 milligrams.
They're just using the state's current criteria. They didn't know enough to go to 10.
Is that really what the state says?
Approved systems are approved for 19.
Yeah, but the inflow, the effluent.
This is the effluent they're talking
What
about.
they start with shouldn't be 22, it should be 50.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, that was a little confusing.
I probably misread that now. I just saw that 19, and I was like, that's the state's number, yeah.
So,
I think the important takeaway that I get from this is there's a growing consensus that PRBs merit a lot more consideration in overall wastewater planning, and in particular in a area like Snug Harbor and West Falmouth Harbor, which is, that seems to concentrate, there seems to be a hotspot that Ken and many years of research and data collection have actually measured, there's a hotspot there, and that a PRB is a very viable way to address it in a cost-effective manner. So remaining cautiously optimistic that a way will be found to make it happen. And I think it's outstanding that, there's a younger generation of engineers learning about this stuff, looking to make at least a theoretical proposal. The next thing needs to be an actual physical implementation. And my one question about that report was, okay, they've got a monitoring schedule planned over a number of years, but I think the thing I took away from Paul's presentation to us a year or so ago was a lot of cost up front is where is most effective to put that PRB and what are the existing conditions. How deep, how concentrated, and how widespread horizontally, I'll say, is the plume, for lack of a better term. And so that pre-engineering, they didn't talk too much about that, but they were big on follow-up after the fact. But you need to know current existing conditions so you properly cite depth, spacing, and all that. And it's, again, interests me that their first thought here is along the bike path is a cool, easy spot to do it.
well, I want to address that issue too, because that's another tremendous advantage of the PRB is the aesthetics of the PRB. There's some disruption while it's being installed and set up, and then basically it's out of sight, out of mind, 24/7, plugging away underground. So if you're going into a pleasant residential area like West Falmouth, you don't want big tanks and towers and pumps running day and night and all kinds of other things that happen when you're trying to clean a site up. So that's another big plus, I think, easily be sold to the public.
Jonathan got his hand up before anybody else, so we'll give him a shot.
I guess what controlled the depth of the PRB? Is it 10 meters? I was looking at the diagram that showed the plume going down, and it looks like it's still going down beyond 10 meters. So have they given consideration to how deep they have to put this EVO into the ground to intercept the flow that's coming from the deeper regions that are the deeper flow lines into the harbor?
You know, the study.
I think that some of the data that we've seen in the past, there's a portion of the plume that makes it to Snug Harbor. There's another portion which is down deeper, which
Yes.
slides underneath West Falmouth Harbor.
Yeah, under the whole harbor out to
The
the
whole
bay.
harbor.
My
The
understanding.
lower level does not surface in the harbor.
Yeah.
You know, there's technology limitations to how deep they can do this effectively.
Or
And
economically.
coincidentally, it seems like, based on data from Ken's studies and the town test wells, there is a very significant plume at a reachable depth, within that 30-foot level. Yep, there's stuff down deeper that's going out further into the harbor or beyond the harbor into Buzzards Bay, but there's a significant number of kilograms of nitrogen that you can capture with the technology, so.
John?
I'd like to be a total contrarian. More than 20 years ago, the Air Force came to the town with a proposal to clean up the Ashumet Valley when we contaminated our primary well there. And they first proposed to put in carbon filtration, and they were basically going to circulate a very large proportion of the groundwater in the Ashumet lens through these carbon filters. And we said, that's absurd. You know, it's taken many years for this problem to develop. And so we suggested to the Air Force, let's treat the water in the uppermost contaminated area of the Ashumet Valley with carbon. And in exchange, you give us, and we simply let history, the bottom part of that plume, take 50 or 75 years to run to the coast and go away. The problem we didn't develop instantly. And the deal we cut with the Air Force was they gave us a large chunk of money, and I don't remember, was it?
8.5 million, I believe.
And that we've been using to ameliorate nitrogen problems. And I make the same analogy now in West Falmouth. We are developing a plan and are fairly committed to an ocean outfall, which we're going to pay a great deal of money to install, which will remove all the wastewater from the plant from West Falmouth. So why in the interim would we consider putting a PRB in Snug Harbor? You know, we've been waiting for 15 or 20 years for this plume to wash through. We can afford to wait a little bit longer and spend our money somewhere more appropriate that immediately solves a problem. That's just.
Can I briefly?
Oh, no, because Steve had his hand up, he has not had a chance to chime in.
John took half of the words out of my mouth. That if we're going to do the outfall anyway, then that option is free for Snug Harbor because it's amortized over so many other watersheds. It doesn't work, and John said the rest of it about the timing. I agree with it. The other thing is more operational. Is this meeting being recorded by FCTV?
I believe so.
So please tell them to look it up on FCTV. I mean, that's the whole point of the educational aspect of it.
Yep.
Can I?
No, good, Tom.
We've already established that taking all the water that's going to
You're
West
next.
Falmouth and sending it to Falmouth Heights is going to reduce the hydraulic head. So that it's already taken 2 or 3 times as long for that plume to make it to Snug Harbor. When we cut off the pressure at the top of the heap, it's going to take even longer. So the Snug Harbor problem, which I can vouch for, is a disaster in midsummer now, is going to continue to be a disaster, and I don't even want to guess at what the time course. But I think ironically, by taking the water away from there, we're going to make it a longer-term problem than it would be otherwise.
Ken?
Well, I think I mean, John, it's not one or the other, right? We want to do the outfall, we want to get that nitrogen out of the West Falmouth Harbor watershed altogether. But the problem is the lags, and we're looking at anywhere from 15 to 20 years of additional loading, excess loading to the harbor. If we could put a PRB in near the shore, we could stop a significant portion of that load within a year or two.
But then you have to, then you're changing the whole town rules. You have to look at how that ranks in priority compared to doing a nice, immediate thing for all the other estuaries.
Well, this is something that isn't gonna be super expensive. I think when we have a proposal pending, if it gets funded, for doing this for $300,000. And to reduce
Well, then.
the loading.
Then you're using free money from somewhere else.
But well, even if you didn't have free money, to significantly reduce the loading, remove 500, 1,000 kilograms per year of nutrient load from Snug Harbor and improve the health of the harbor for that amount of money would be a cheap investment. That's at the rate of $50,000 per IA, that's equivalent to 5 or 6 IAs.
We're going to move off of Snug Harbor unless there's somebody in the audience that has got a key thing to say, because we have 15 minutes and we've got to get through a couple of other things.
Matthew Hanley for Thomas Landers Road. I think John Waterbury, said it best. Let's go back to the source. We know what the source of the nitrogen is in Snug Harbor. It's the wastewater treatment facility's discharge. And I also believe the discussion about, the hydraulic loading once we go to the outfall pipe is a good point to look at. I've been having discussions beyond this group and talking to Mass Tech and some other people. I have a theory that we should put the PRB closer to the wastewater treatment facility. Ken Foreman, you're the expert in the effective range of these PRBs. What is the effective range? How once you go further and further away from the injection site, where do you lose your effectiveness?
I think that the problem at the wastewater plants, you got 100 feet of unsaturated zone before you even get to the water table. So
It's really deep,
It would be deep.
really deep.
I don't think from a geotechnical point of view, it's really feasible to do it there. You could conceivably put, this has been talked about, put something under the sand infiltration beds, but if you don't have nitrate yet, if what you're putting out there is
Not speciated
the
properly.
residual effluent that's the largely organic end that didn't decompose, couldn't get rid of during the treatment process, the PRB isn't going to do anything to it. You have to have it in the form of nitrate.
You've got millions of gallons of legacy plume that's beyond that point already. That's
Right.
gonna take 20 to 30 years to
That's
dissipate.
really what we're after.
That's the key.
We're not, I think everyone agrees,
They're
we
gonna-
want to get an outfall, we want to
We're
get
going to
this
move
stuff
on. We're-
out of there.
We're going to move on.
But
We're going to move on.
in the meantime, we could be looking at another 20.
I might get to use this. We're going to move on, okay?
20 years.
I know, yeah.
So,
Listen, we can put PRBs and the effectiveness of PRBs onto another meeting and spend 2 hours on it, if that's what we want to do, okay? Right now, I'm going to skip over number 4, reports of members and staff, and get to the minutes of the prior meeting. Tom? I'm going to come back to 4. I'm going to come back to 4.
Yeah, well, the minutes are there. I'm hoping that someone besides me would think it's worth,
I move that they be accepted as written.
and I'll second Steve's motion.
Okay. All those, any further discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
One abstention. I wasn't here.
That's fine, thank you, John.
I don't think I was either.
You were not.
You weren't, you're not on the list.
Therefore, I abstain.
And I don't see John Water, yeah, so you guys are abstaining, yes.
Okay. All right, reports of members and staff. I do want to note that we got a real wake-up call over the last week. I think everybody saw the pictures at Wacoit,
Yes.
the thick algae mats that had appeared out there.
A week ago today, overnight.
Really, really significant. So to the extent that we want to wait 20 years to do anything, is not a good long-term plan in my world. And so, I want to acknowledge that we're very much aware of what happened in Wacoit Bay, and it's not a good thing. I mean, a number of years ago, we got fish kills in Little Pond. That was, got everybody's attention, and that's out there. The other one is, did we get some news on one of our grants or not?
The Southeast New England letter of intent for the Snug Harbor PRB was not selected to move forward to full proposal.
Right. So I wanted to cover that. And then the other side of that was, we did get grant money to buy 2 data loggers. And that, we checked with the town, and we don't need to go back before the selectmen, because they already allowed us to submit the grant before. And those purchases, Amy, they will flow through you, is that correct?
Invoices have to go through me.
Yeah, I just want to be sure, since there's a short time to buy these things and stay inside the grant deadlines. Kristen, are you working with her?
She's on my list to discuss with.
Okay, all right. All right, that's good. Any other reports of members?
I think
Steve, you had a urine diversion meeting recently? Didn't you have a meeting on Wednesday?
no. Or, I mean, it was,
They were temporarily diverted.
well, I don't think anything was decided that wasn't reported here by Brian Horsley at our previous meeting.
Yeah, so Kim arranged, after Brian was here before, for a secondary discussion, because if you recall, we all started off on urine diversion and looking at getting it approved as an IA with the 50s and the 3 years. My sense after this was mentioned at our last meeting, but I don't think anybody picked up on it, is that they're now going down the path of, we don't need to get it approved as an IA, that if people are doing urine diversion, we can then, much like oysters, say so much urine was removed out of the watershed, and get credit that way. So it's not there. That's what I heard, is that they're no longer pursuing a program to get it approved as an IA, that they're now looking at just getting the collection, the handling, and disposal of urine acceptable within the state, whether it's the Department of Agriculture, through the plumbing board, and everything else.
Do you mind confirming that?
I thought it was both pathways were being pursued.
I
I'm
think
going to turn to Kim, because Kim said in the meeting, I walked out of that meeting that they felt they had just gotten to the point with the DEP saying, we're not going down the IA route, we're going down this watershed route.
Okay, can I make a
And I'm going to invite him back. I'm going to invite him back to clarify that.
point real quickly, and John brought this up before, and it's very important. If you can get it classified as a, quote, upgrade, I guess would be the term, then we can play the game of getting the income tax credit for it.
I'm aware of that. I'm just telling you.
Okay, so I'm just saying that.
We got to get Brian to come back and clarify
Right.
where they're at right now, but they're going with, if you guys want to put it into your watershed plan and gather the stuff and measure it, but they're not treated as an IA.
Yeah, but that gathering that data and being able to present that to them on our side, sort of as a strategic thing, is a good idea. But I really think, from a practical standpoint, any financial encouragement, because we're asking for a big commitment from people.
I hear you, but I'm telling you that
Right.
it was very clear when I met with, Brian, the two Brians and Ed was there, and they were very clear on it.
Yeah, it was a gobsmack.
There was a strenuous discussion of these elements. I'm just wary of, has been organized, I didn't ask for this or cause it, but it's a closed meeting. It's not recorded and it's not open to the public. And so I'm wary of reporting something that someone may or may not have said at the meeting as being a decision.
I'm telling you that I want to have Brian come back before us so we can update us
That's fine.
as what happened, okay? And I'm trying to lay the groundwork for why we're gonna invite Brian to come back, even though he was just recently here. Okay? And I thought you were gonna discuss it, I thought you were gonna discuss it in your meeting that afternoon, and you could then report it.
We did.
Okay, but you don't wanna report
Some
it.
things are still controversial, but, I mean, get Kim to correct me if he wants to. I think there's a strong opinion that the town will not subsidize that installing a UD, even in the pilot project, or for any reason, will not get you off the hook from being on a sewer or from having to install an IA in areas where those are otherwise mandated. There might be a financial subsidy, but if you're then told you have to put in an IA, it's money down the drain, because now you have to put in the IA.
Even if they approve the urine diversion as an innovative alternative option, if the state does that?
Yes. Because the effectiveness probably won't be as high.
I think
I'm gonna invite Brian back to explain where they're at.
And
It's a
because
working process.
the cheating possibility is too easy.
Well, I mean, you know,
But you're gonna
that
be
goes to,
monitored.
do you make them do all the toilets?
Yeah, it's a working process. I think we should leave it at that, because
Fair
there's a very active discussion going on the direction and policies and rules of this whole concept. And it's been taken from this committee to a smaller, compact working group that's working to come up with a proposal that would be acceptable. And I think we should leave it at that.
Thank you, good point.
Any other committees that want to report? Yes.
The final sampling for the Shorewood Drive PRB, that last one from the 2 years, it will be happening either the first or second week of June. So this is the last sampling that has been funded.
Okay.
So I'll let you know when I'm out there,
Mr. Chairman?
because I know you want to come visit.
I think it's worth noting that I hope everybody's aware that there was a resounding affirmative vote to proceed with Phase 1 of Great Pond. I think that's outstanding. I think it was a great selling and educational process, a great number of presentations that Amy can probably give in her sleep now. She's done it so often, but people were sold on the concept, and outstanding that we are going to proceed as a town with another sewering project, because it's probably the last one that those of us on this committee will see in our lifetime.
Okay,
Don't be so negative.
let me ride that a little bit.
I will
further.
entertain a motion to adjourn.
Wait,
No,
I have
no,
one
wait, let me
really
make a point
critical,
while we've got
I have
Amy
one
Tripp.
really critical question about the Great Pond thing, which is who came up with the sign verbiage?
That was this sad person over here.
No, I asked people what they thought the thing should say, and I got several suggestions, and so I did not come up with the thing. It was the gentleman, what's his name? I think he's in Falmouth Port, in the, whatever. What, did you like it?
Elon something.
I liked it, yeah, yeah.
No, but
Yeah,
I
it
take
worked.
no credit.
So, Ed and I have discussed this several times. Now that the ball is really rolling, we need a bunch of localized, the sewer is coming meetings, advertised multiple times, and just to get people prepared and ready for this disruption that's coming. And of course,
Kristen,
presumably they
add as a
know-
future agenda item a discussion of public outreach.
Yes, good point.
It's a good point. Because there are a lot of people that
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Adjourned.
Kim?